Tonight, we are traveling to the farthest point from human life on Earth. Not hidden, not forbidden, just far enough to be forgotten. Somewhere in the open Pacific, there is a single location defined not by storms or ice, but by distance alone. It sits farther from land than anywhere else on the planet, so far removed that the nearest people are often not on Earth at all, but circling silently above it in orbit. The ocean there looks ordinary, yet almost nothing ever passes through. Scientists can calculate its coordinates precisely, measuring the long arcs of water that separate it from every shore. Ships avoid it because there is no reason to pass through. Fishing fleets find richer waters elsewhere. Air routes bend away, not out of caution, but efficiency. Even wildlife thins here. No nation claims this place. No borders touch it. No laws protect it. And yet, despite its remoteness, it has become deeply connected to our modern civilization. Tonight, we allow distance itself to guide us to the remote center of the ocean. But before we begin, if you're already settling in for this journey, it would mean so much if you gave this video a like or subscribed, if you'd like more sleepy science adventures like this one. And if you feel like sharing, I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? What time is it there? It's always a joy to see how far across the world our little corner of curiosity reaches. So now, take a deep breath, let your shoulders loosen, and together, let us drift softly toward the loneliest place on earth. Loneliness, when applied to a place, does not live in emotion. It cannot be sensed by the body or inferred from silence alone. It must be measured. For geography, isolation becomes meaningful only when it is stripped of feeling and reduced to distance, traced across maps where memory and narrative have no influence. What remains is a quiet arithmetic, indifferent and exact, where remoteness is not a mood but a number written in kilometers and curves. On land, this idea feels intuitive. Mountain interiors and polar plateaus appear empty because they resist access. In the ocean, intuition fails. Water suggests openness, movement, continuity. Yet true separation is not defined by how wide a place appears, but by how far it sits from solid ground. Distance from people changes constantly. Distance from land remains steady, anchored to coastlines and continental edges that drift only over geological time. To formalize this idea, geographers use a concept known as poles of inaccessibility. These are points that sit farther from a defined boundary than any other location. On land, the boundary is the sea. In the ocean, the boundary reverses. The coastline becomes the reference, and the most isolated point is where land retreats in every direction, leaving water uninterrupted for thousands of kilometers. The result is counterintuitive. The ocean contains a point that lies farther from land than any place on land lies from the sea. Continents create constraints, narrowing possibilities. The ocean allows distance to accumulate without obstruction. Over vast arcs of water, coastlines curve away, leaving a single coordinate that becomes the purest expression of separation Earth can offer. Finding such a point was not always possible. Earlier maps lacked precision, and the ocean resisted clean measurement. Coastlines were approximated, islands mislocated, distances rounded into uncertainty. Only with satellite positioning, global bathymetry, and continuous orbital mapping did the calculation become stable. Earth could finally be treated as a complete surface rather than a patchwork of guesses. With this clarity, loneliness becomes a mathematical certainty. It is defined not by absence of life or lack of movement, but by a balance of distances converging toward a single location. No story is required. No human presence needs to be imagined or erased. The calculation stands even if the ocean were empty or crowded. In this way, the loneliest place is not chosen for its drama or danger. It exists because geometry allows it to exist, a calm solution to an abstract problem, resting quietly in the open sea, waiting to be named only after humanity learned how to measure the planet without standing on it. The coordinates appear ordinary at first glance, a pair of numbers resting quietly on a chart of the South Pacific. They do not carry names passed down through culture or routes traced by habit. They exist as a solution, precise and unadorned, describing a point where longitude and latitude cross without invitation or memory. For most of history, no one needed to know this place existed at all. That point lies deep within the South Pacific Ocean, far from continental margins, and far from the familiar chains of inhabited islands. In every direction, land recedes with remarkable consistency. The nearest shores sit thousands of kilometers away, spread thin across hemispheres rather than clustered nearby. Even those nearest landforms offer little reassurance of human presence. They are small, distant islands with modest populations, places shaped more by weather and isolation than by movement or trade. Measured outward from the coordinates, distance becomes the defining feature. No coast interrupts the surrounding water. No island rises close enough to shrink the gap. The geometry holds steady, forming a vast circle of ocean whose radius exceeds that of any comparable distance found on land. The world opens in all directions, yet nothing approaches. On global maps, this region barely stands out. Shipping lanes arc away from it. Flight paths curve north and west, choosing efficiency over symmetry. Political borders dissolve into blue, leaving a surface uninterrupted by labels or lines. Even on detailed atlases, the area appears understated, its emptiness masked by the sameness of open water. The land that frames this point, when it finally appears at the edges of measurement, offers little density of its own. Sparse settlements, limited infrastructure, and long supply lines define those distant coasts. They are among the quietest inhabited places on Earth, reinforcing the isolation rather than interrupting it. Their distance is not softened by activity, only confirmed by scale. What gives the coordinates their weight is not visual drama, but numerical clarity. Once measured, emptiness acquires shape. The mind traces arcs from the point to every nearest shore and finds only space between them. Distance ceases to be abstract. It becomes quantifiable, repeatable, and undeniable. This precision is a recent gift. Only with modern satellite navigation and complete global datasets did the planet reveal this balance of distances so cleanly. The coordinates could not have been trusted earlier when maps bent coastlines and misplaced islands. Now the calculation holds firm, independent of weather, traffic, or observation. In this way, the South Pacific contains a place defined not by what gathers there, but by how far everything else remains. Emptiness becomes more striking once it can be measured, when silence gains dimensions and absence acquires borders made only of numbers. Above the vast quiet of the South Pacific, motion never fully stops. Long after the surface has slipped beyond routes and schedules, a thin procession continues overhead, tracing invisible lines across the sky. These paths do not belong to ships or aircraft, but to humans moving far beyond the sea, carried in controlled arcs by the momentum of orbit. At regular intervals, astronauts pass nearer to that isolated point than anyone on Earth ever does. Hundreds of kilometers above the water, their spacecraft cross overhead in minutes, briefly becoming the closest human presence to a place defined by distance. Below them, the ocean remains unchanged, wide and unmarked, while above it, life moves swiftly in silence. This overlap is not accidental. Orbital paths favor efficiency and stability, sweeping across latitudes without regard for what lies beneath. The planet turns beneath these trajectories, and isolation on the surface does not translate to isolation in space. A location avoided by ships and planes can still sit directly under routes traveled repeatedly by humans who never see it. The contrast is subtle but profound. Human presence has expanded upward faster than it has filled outward. Space, once unreachable, now hosts continuous occupation, while certain regions of Earth remain effectively untouched. The nearest heartbeat to the loneliest ocean point may belong to someone circling the planet at extraordinary speed, separated by layers of air and distance, but closer than any vessel afloat. This closeness carries an unusual weight. It compresses scale in unexpected ways, bringing together the extremes of remoteness and connection. A place chosen for its separation from human risk lies beneath humans who have left the surface entirely. Distance, once purely horizontal, has gained a vertical dimension. It reveals something fundamental about modern presence. Humans no longer occupy the planet evenly or gradually. We leap. We bypass. We build pathways above difficult terrain instead of through it. The ocean remains resistant, expensive, and slow, while the sky offers predictable routes and continuous access. Orbit has become more familiar than certain waters below. From this perspective, isolation changes meaning. A place can be surrounded by emptiness and still lie directly beneath human movement. Presence does not require proximity in the old sense. It can pass overhead without touching, close without arrival, connected without encounter. The planet now holds layers of activity, stacked rather than spread. Life concentrates along coasts, corridors, and altitudes, leaving gaps between them that grow quieter by comparison. In this arrangement, the loneliest place on Earth is not far from humanity at all. It simply exists outside the paths we choose to take, resting beneath trajectories that acknowledge it only by passing silently above. Long before a ship ever leaves harbor, its journey has already taken shape on screens and tables far from the sea. Routes are drawn not by romance or discovery, but by calculations that balance time, fuel, weather, and the thin margin between routine passage and irreversible trouble. The ocean appears wide and permissive, yet only a narrow web of paths is used again and again, reinforced by repetition. Global shipping follows efficiency above all else. Currents are studied, prevailing winds accounted for, and distances shaved wherever possible. A straight line is rarely the best option. Instead, routes curve toward coasts, ports, and established corridors where support exists. Every deviation carries cost, measured in fuel burned, hours added, and uncertainty introduced. In remote regions of open ocean, those costs rise quietly but relentlessly. Fuel consumption increases when ships stray from optimized paths. Weather forecasting becomes less reliable without nearby observation points. Most significant of all, rescue distance expands. In shipping, risk is not defined by storms alone, but by how long help would take to arrive if something failed. When machinery breaks or a crew member falls ill, proximity matters. Ports, other vessels, and patrol zones act as invisible safety nets. Far from these networks, even minor incidents become complex. Assistance measured in minutes near busy lanes stretches into days in isolation. Insurance models account for this reality, adjusting premiums and recommendations accordingly. For these reasons, isolation does not offer protection, it offers exposure. A quiet ocean does not lower danger when response time lengthens beyond practicality. Avoidance becomes the rational choice, not out of fear, but out of arithmetic. Over time, this logic reinforces itself. Ships do not travel where ships are not expected. Traffic data guides future planning, and empty regions grow emptier through feedback rather than intent. Navigation systems highlight established routes, and crews grow familiar with the same horizons year after year. The absence of traffic becomes another factor steering traffic away. This avoidance leaves subtle marks on global maps. Lines thicken where movement concentrates and thin where it fades. The loneliest region remains largely untouched, not because it is unknown, but because it offers nothing to the systems that carry goods across the planet. No shortcut passes through it, no port anchors it, no contingency plan favors it. As commerce flows around this quiet center, the ocean there settles into a different rhythm. Waves rise and fall without interruption. No wakes cross its surface. The absence of passage becomes stable, self-maintained by the structures of trade and safety. In this way, emptiness is not accidental. It is sustained by decisions repeated across decades, written into logistics, software, and policy documents rather than stories. Ships quietly avoid this region because the world has arranged itself to move elsewhere, leaving a wide circle of water where efficiency and caution agree to pass by. There are places at sea defined not by danger or depth, but by how rarely anyone looks toward them. This region exists far from routines that give the ocean its familiar patterns. Nets are never lowered here. Buoys are not set. No radio chatter marks the start or end of a working day. The surface carries no signs of labor, only water moving according to wind and tide. Fishing fleets pass it by for reasons that accumulate quietly. Far from land, nutrients thin, and life spreads out rather than gathering. Without the upwelling of coastal waters or the mixing caused by continental shelves, the ocean offers little concentration to pursue. The effort required to reach such a place outweighs what could be taken from it. Modern fisheries depend on predictability, on knowing that effort will meet return. In this expanse, the sea keeps its distance. Tourism never arrives for similar reasons. Travel across water demands destinations, places to pause, to anchor, to resupply. This patch of ocean offers none of these. There are no islands to break the horizon, no reefs to shelter boats, no landmarks to turn movement into arrival. Even adventure seeks a foothold, and here the sea provides only continuity. The journey would consume itself, leaving no moment distinct enough to become a memory. Ports do not exist without traffic, and traffic does not emerge without purpose. Harbors are built where routes converge, where trade pauses, where weather offers brief protection. This ocean holds no such intersections. Its depth drops away from shore without invitation, and its distance discourages stopping. Infrastructure follows use, and without use, nothing accumulates. The water remains unmarked by construction because nothing asks to remain there. Over time, this absence reshapes perception. The open ocean suggests movement, passage, and connection between known places. An unused ocean feels different. It is not a highway, but a blank space between paths, present on maps yet absent from experience. It holds the same waves and weather as any other sea, yet it resists incorporation into human routines. This difference is subtle but lasting. Open water still belongs to someone's journey. Unused water belongs only to itself. It exists without reference to schedules, without expectation of encounter. Even satellites that pass overhead do not confer familiarity. Observation does not equal presence. What remains is a stretch of sea that supports life sparingly and human activity almost not at all. No industry depends on it. No stories circulate around it. Its silence is not enforced by rule or fear, but by indifference shaped through calculation and habit. In this way, the loneliest patch of ocean is not hidden. It is simply left alone, surrounded by paths that curve elsewhere, carrying human attention away while the water continues, unnoticed, doing nothing at all. Here, survival begins with what is missing. Far from continents and river mouths, the ocean receives little of the material that fuels abundance elsewhere. Iron, nitrogen, and phosphorus arrive sparsely, drifting in slow from distant sources rather than being poured in by land. Without these nutrients, the sea offers few starting points for life to gather momentum. Sunlight still reaches the surface, but light alone is not enough. Phytoplankton, the microscopic foundation of marine food webs, depend on chemistry as much as brightness. In this region, their growth remains limited, not by energy, but by scarcity. Blooms never fully form. Productivity stays low, spread thin across immense volumes of water rather than concentrated into visible swirls or streaks. This absence shapes everything that follows. Where plankton is rare, grazing zooplankton remains sparse. Small fish do not school densely because there is nothing to hold them together. Predators that rely on aggregation find little reason to linger. Movement replaces residence. Life passes through more often than it stays. The water appears deceptively uniform, but it carries subtle gradients. Trace nutrients descend slowly from the atmosphere, delivered by distant dust storms that lose their strength long before reaching this latitude. Occasional mixing from storms stirs deeper layers, but the depth of the ocean here limits what can be brought back to the surface. The sea keeps its reserves locked below. This creates an ecosystem defined by efficiency. Organisms grow slowly, conserve energy, and adapt to low expectations. Many species here are small, transparent, or transient. Longevity replaces abundance. Survival depends on patience rather than speed. Higher up the food chain, this restraint echoes. Large animals are uncommon, not because the environment is hostile, but because it cannot sustain numbers. Migratory species may cross these waters, carrying their energy with them from richer regions, then moving on. Few remain long enough to leave a mark. Even microbial life reflects this quiet economy. Bacteria recycle what little organic matter sinks from above, breaking it down again and again before it can accumulate. The system runs in place, stable yet restrained, balanced on minimal input. From afar, the ocean looks alive everywhere, a single moving surface. From within, differences emerge. Coastal seas pulse with color and motion. This patch remains subdued, its life stretched across distances too wide to notice without measurement. It is not empty, but it is never crowded. Existence here is defined by dispersion. No single organism dominates. No event reshapes the balance dramatically. The food chain remains long and thin, its links connected by necessity rather than surplus. In this way, the loneliest place in the ocean supports life without offering comfort. It sustains organisms just well enough to persist, spread lightly across the water, leaving little trace of their presence beyond the quiet continuity of survival itself. Beneath the quiet surface, distance continues downward. The water column stretches far beyond light, pressure increasing steadily as depth replaces horizon. At this point in the South Pacific, the ocean floor lies several thousand meters below, a vertical separation that rivals the horizontal remoteness above it. The emptiness does not end at the surface, it deepens. This region sits above some of the deepest open ocean on the planet. There is no continental shelf nearby to soften the descent. The seafloor drops away quickly, settling into abyssal plains shaped by slow geological processes rather than dramatic relief. These plains are wide, dark, and cold, smoothed over millions of years by fine sediment drifting down from above. What scientists know of this place comes largely from indirect observation. Satellite altimetry hints at subtle variations in gravity, revealing gentle rises and depressions beneath the water. Echo sounders trace long profiles during rare research transits, sketching outlines rather than offering detail. From these measurements emerges a picture that is broad but spare, suggesting stability rather than complexity. Direct exploration has been minimal. Remotely operated vehicles and crude submersibles favor regions closer to coasts, where access is easier and discoveries more likely. Sending equipment to this location demands long travel times, careful planning, and significant expense. The depth alone limits opportunity, turning each potential mission into a logistical undertaking that few institutions attempt. As a result, the seafloor here remains largely unseen. Its sediments, mineral composition, and biological communities are inferred rather than cataloged. Samples are scarce, images rarer still. The absence of curiosity is not due to lack of importance, but to the practical weight of distance layered upon depth. This vertical isolation compounds everything above. Any object reaching the surface from orbit must still pass through kilometers of water before coming to rest. Any trace left behind settles into darkness where retrieval becomes improbable. Depth acts as a final barrier, sealing events away from observation and memory. Life persists here as it does elsewhere on the abyssal plane, but at low densities, organisms adapt to cold, pressure, and limited food falling slowly from above. Movement is slow, growth measured, encounters infrequent. Time stretches differently in this environment, paced by scarcity and stillness. Depth adds a second silence to an already quiet place. Not only is the surface rarely crossed, but the ground beneath it remains almost entirely untouched. Exploration fades before reaching it, leaving the seafloor to exist without witness. In this way, remoteness becomes complete. Horizontal distance keeps humans away. Vertical distance removes even the possibility of easy observation. Together, they form a layered separation that leaves this place intact, not because it is guarded, but because reaching it demands more than the world is usually willing to offer. Silence here is not an absence, but a condition shaped by distance. The ocean carries sound with patience, guiding vibrations along pathways formed by pressure, temperature, and depth. Layers of water bend and refract noise, allowing it to travel far beyond where it began, slipping beneath the surface and moving laterally through darkness long after the source has faded. In the open sea, sound behaves differently than it does in air. Low frequencies slide easily through the water column, spreading outward until they soften into background texture. A distant storm can be heard long after its clouds dissolve. Swells rolling across the surface add a steady pulse, a slow breathing that never fully stops. Even the planet contributes. Subtle tremors from tectonic movement echo faintly through the deep. Microseisms, generated by interacting waves, transmit energy downward, creating a low murmur tied to the motion of Earth itself. These signals blend together, forming a constant acoustic floor that exists whether anyone listens or not. What is missing stands out against this backdrop. Human sound rarely reaches this place. No engines pass nearby, no anchors drop, no sonar sweeps the water in routine patterns. The lanes of commerce and transit lie far away, and with them the mechanical signatures that dominate other oceans. Here, the acoustic landscape remains largely untouched by deliberate noise. This absence is measurable. Hydrophones lowered into the water detect fewer abrupt signals, fewer sharp intrusions that interrupt the natural flow. The recordings stretch long and even, punctuated only by distant events softened by travel. The ocean speaks mostly to itself. Instruments have become the primary witnesses to this quiet. Moored sensors and drifting arrays listen continuously, gathering data where human presence never persists. They register the passing of storms without seeing clouds, the movement of currents without feeling them. They hear life as brief interruptions, clicks and calls that appear and vanish without congregation. These sounds reveal sparse activity rather than abundance. Whales cross occasionally, their calls elongated by distance. Smaller creatures contribute faint signals easily lost in the ambient field. Nothing lingers long enough to build a chorus. The soundscape remains open, defined more by space than by event. Listening in such a place changes what listening means. There is no expectation of response, no immediate feedback. Data accumulates slowly, confirming patterns rather than surprises. Silence becomes something to analyze, layered and textured rather than empty. In this region, sound travels freely but arrives without urgency. It moves across a vast, unused expanse, carrying information without audience. The ocean remains quietly active, filled with motion and vibration that pass unnoticed, leaving behind a record of presence that exists only because something was patient enough to hear it. At a certain scale, absence becomes practical. Far from routes and routines, isolation transforms from an inconvenience into a condition with purpose. In places where nothing passes and nothing pauses, unpredictability fades. The ocean's emptiness begins to offer something rare, a margin wide enough to contain consequence without spreading it. Modern systems often seek control through separation. When activity must occur without interruption, distance provides a buffer that no barrier can replace. Remoteness reduces the number of variables. Fewer vessels mean fewer collisions of intent, fewer witnesses, fewer chances for chance itself to interfere. In this way, the lack of traffic becomes a feature rather than a flaw. The logic unfolds quietly. Risk is not eliminated, but it is isolated. Events that might endanger lives or infrastructure elsewhere are allowed to resolve on their own, surrounded by nothing that can be harmed. The ocean, vast and patient, absorbs outcomes without immediate effect beyond its surface. Emptiness limits escalation. This reasoning has guided decisions across decades. Planners look for spaces where mistakes do not compound, where failure falls inward rather than outward. In crowded regions, every action ripples quickly into something larger. In isolation, ripples fade before they meet another shore. Safety, in this context, does not emerge from strength or defense. It emerges from distance. When nothing is nearby, nothing is threatened. The absence of witnesses becomes a form of protection, not secrecy, but containment. The world is spared involvement simply because there is no path for involvement to follow. Such places must be predictable. Calm seas, stable weather patterns, and low human presence combine to form reliability. The ocean here behaves consistently, without the congestion that complicates coordination elsewhere. Remoteness simplifies logistics by removing the need for constant adjustment. What remains is a controlled environment shaped by scale rather than structure. This use of isolation reflects how humanity now navigates complexity. Instead of conquering every space, some are left deliberately empty, reserved not for habitation or extraction but for resolution. They function as buffers in a crowded planet, spaces where consequences are allowed to end quietly. The strategic value lies not in what these places offer, but in what they lack. No trade lanes intersect, no communities lie downstream, no ecosystems depend on constant human presence. The ocean's indifference becomes an asset, its vastness a form of stability. In choosing emptiness, modern society acknowledges its limits. There are moments when the safest option is not control, but distance. Isolation becomes a tool, used sparingly and precisely, relying on the simple fact that when nothing surrounds an event, it remains contained. Here, in the loneliest reaches of the ocean, absence itself performs work. It holds space for outcomes that must occur somewhere, ensuring they happen where they touch the fewest lives, leaving the rest of the world unchanged. Nothing placed in orbit remains there forever. Even the most stable paths are temporary, shaped by gravity, drag, and time. Spacecraft circle Earth in a delicate balance, constantly falling while moving forward fast enough to miss the ground. Over months or years, that balance weakens. The thin breath of atmosphere tugs gently but relentlessly, lowering altitude until return becomes unavoidable. Coming back is not optional. Abandoned objects do not drift away into space. They descend without intention, without guidance, they re enter the atmosphere wherever physics allows. Earth pulls everything home eventually, and the planet beneath those paths is not empty. Oceans, continents, shipping lanes, and cities all occupy the surface waiting below. The danger lies in speed. Objects in orbit travel faster than any aircraft, faster than sound by orders of magnitude. When they encounter dense air again, that energy must be released. Heat blooms around them as friction builds, temperatures climbing high enough to strip material away layer by layer. Most spacecraft burn apart during this passage, breaking into fragments that scatter as they fall. Uncontrolled reentry turns that process into chance. Without planning, debris can survive longer than expected, reaching lower altitudes before disintegrating. Larger components may remain intact all the way to the surface. The probabilities are low, but the consequences are real. What survives will land somewhere, and somewhere is rarely as unoccupied as it appears from orbit. Precision changes everything. By choosing when and where descent begins, engineers can shape the outcome. Timing adjusts the angle of entry, controlling how quickly energy is shed. Orientation determines which parts face the most intense heat. Careful planning ensures that surviving fragments fall where impact carries minimal risk. The planet's rotation adds complexity. As Earth turns beneath descending objects, intended landing zones shift. A delay of minutes can move debris thousands of kilometers sideways. Predictive models must account for atmospheric conditions, solar activity, and subtle gravitational variations. Accuracy becomes a matter of stewardship rather than efficiency. Returning safely is not just about protecting people, it is about limiting uncontrolled interaction between human technology and the planet that supports it. Spacecraft are designed with their final moments in mind, built to burn, fragment, and disappear in predictable ways. Their end is as engineered as their launch. This requirement reveals a quiet truth about spaceflight. Leaving Earth may feel expansive, but coming back demands humility. Orbit does not free humanity from consequence. It extends responsibility outward and then brings it home again. Each controlled re-entry reflects an agreement with gravity and atmosphere, an acknowledgement that nothing remains separate forever. Objects sent upward must be guided down with care, returning through a narrow corridor where physics allows choice. Precision is not excess caution, it is the difference between a quiet conclusion and an uncontrolled return to a world already full. The decision did not emerge from a single moment, but from convergence. As human presence in orbit increased, the question of return grew heavier, not philosophically, but operationally. Objects were coming back whether planned or not. Engineers and agencies needed a place where endings could occur quietly, without intersecting the crowded surfaces below. Gradually, attention settled on the most distant stretch of ocean the planet could offer. This region was not selected for mystery or symbolism. It was chosen because it satisfied conditions few places could meet at once. Its remoteness reduced exposure. Its consistent geography simplified prediction. Its lack of traffic removed variables that complicated every other option. What had once been a theoretical point on a map became a solution shaped by necessity. No other location balanced these demands so cleanly. Land was immediately excluded, not by law but by consequence. Even sparsely populated regions carry infrastructure, airspace, and political complexity. Coastal waters remain too busy, too unpredictable. Polar areas introduce challenges of weather, ice, and orbital mechanics. Each alternative carried risks that multiplied rather than contained. Here, predictability mattered more than emptiness alone. The ocean's behavior in this area remains relatively stable. Seasonal patterns change slowly. Currents are broad rather than chaotic. These qualities allow precise modeling of descent, where timing and trajectory must align with the planet's rotation and atmosphere. When planning an ending measured in minutes after years in orbit, reliability becomes invaluable. Isolation completed the equation. With no shipping lanes to interrupt and no routine flights overhead, the margin for error widened. Debris could fall without intersecting human paths. Even uncertainty had space to dissipate. The ocean's vastness functioned not as a void, but as a buffer large enough to absorb consequence. Over time, this use transformed the meaning of the place. It shifted from an abstract coordinate of isolation into a designated endpoint, a location tied to deliberate action rather than neglect. Spacecraft that had served their purpose were guided here with care, their final trajectories calculated with the same precision that once lifted them skyward. Emptiness became essential, not because nothing was valued there, but because nothing depended on constant human presence. The absence of use made use possible. This logic marked a quiet turning point in how humanity relates to distance. Instead of filling every corner, some were preserved as margins for error, places where complexity could end without spilling outward. Thus, the spacecraft graveyard was born not as a monument, but as a function. A remote patch of ocean became the answer to a growing problem, chosen because it asked nothing in return. In its continued quiet, it holds the closing chapters of machines that once circled the Earth, offering a space where endings leave no echo. Objects arrive here without ceremony. They come as silhouettes first, traced only in calculations and timelines, then as brief streaks of heat dissolving into atmosphere. Over years, this ocean has received the closing moments of many machines that once orbited the planet, each following a path designed long before its final descent. Entire space stations have come down into these waters, their frameworks dismantled by heat and pressure as they crossed from vacuum to air. Cargo vehicles followed, packed once with supplies and fuel, then emptied and guided back with intent. Smaller satellites joined them, some planned, others aging into return as their missions ended. Each carried the history of its time above Earth, reduced at last to fragments released into open sea. None of this is accidental. Engineers plan these descents carefully, shaping trajectories months in advance. They calculate orbital decay, atmospheric drag, and the changing shape of Earth beneath the falling path. Orientation matters, timing matters. Even the order in which components separate can be influenced, encouraging disintegration high above the surface and minimizing what survives below. Heat does most of the work. As objects descend, friction strips away material, turning structure into plasma and ash. Aluminum burns brightly and disappears. Composites unravel. What remains is dense and resilient, designed originally to withstand stress, now resisting destruction to the last possible moment. These remnants fall silently into water far below. The debris fields themselves leave little trace. They spread across wide areas, scattered rather than concentrated. The ocean absorbs impact quickly, sealing fragments beneath waves and time. Depth and distance prevent accumulation. Nothing remains visible from above, and nothing rises again to announce arrival. Currents slowly move what sinks, burying pieces beneath sediment grain by grain. Biological activity interacts minimally, encountering metal rarely and sporadically. Without retrieval or disturbance, these remnants become part of the seafloor's long inventory, joining materials that arrived through other means over geological time. Observation remains indirect. Satellites track descent until fragments vanish from instruments. Models predict dispersion patterns, but confirmation is limited. The ocean does not report what it receives. It keeps its record quietly, hidden beneath kilometers of water and layers of motion. This invisibility reinforces the choice of place. The absence of surface evidence ensures that endings do not intrude on the living world. Spacecraft complete their journey without becoming landmarks or warnings. Their passing leaves no marker beyond a brief flare of heat high above. What has fallen here represents a fraction of human activity, carefully bounded and deliberately concluded. Machines that once circled Earth endlessly have found their final stillness in a region defined by distance. Their stories end not with impact, but with disappearance, absorbed into an ocean that holds them without comment or trace. Nothing stands here to signal arrival. No structures rise from the water. No markers break the horizon. No lights appear at night to suggest proximity or use. The surface remains unchanged from one day to the next, shaped only by wind and swell. It offers no evidence that it has ever been visited, let alone used. There are no footprints because there is nowhere to stand. No foundations anchor into the sea. No cables stretch downward. Even the routes that lead elsewhere do not pass through this place. It exists without interruption, its presence defined more by continuity than by event. And yet, the marks are real. They are simply hidden from view. Far below the surface, fragments of modern technology rest in darkness. Twisted metal, heat-scarred components, and dense structures lie scattered across the seafloor, separated by distances too large to suggest accumulation. They did not arrive together, and they did not remain whole. These objects did not build upon one another. They left no infrastructure behind. Each arrival ended completely, dissolving into the ocean without ceremony. The water closed over impact points almost immediately, erasing any surface trace. What remains is evidence without visibility, a record kept out of sight. This makes the place unusual among human-altered environments. Most traces of activity grow louder with time. Roads widen, buildings multiply, scars deepen. Here, use does not compound. Nothing encourages return. Nothing improves access. The more often this place serves its purpose, the less it appears to change. Humanity's footprint exists as consequence rather than intention. The technology that reached the seafloor was not meant to stay visible or usable. It was meant to finish its journey. Its presence is the residue of care, of calculations designed to avoid interference with the living world elsewhere. The emptiness above remains intact because the impact happens far below, both physically and symbolically. No community forms around it, no memory attaches to the surface. The place does not become known through experience, only through awareness of function. This creates a quiet contradiction. An empty ocean, chosen deliberately, carries proof of some of the most complex machines humanity has ever built. Their remains lie still, not arranged or commemorated, simply resting where gravity and water placed them. Over time, even these traces will change. Corrosion works slowly, sediment settles, edges soften. The boundary between natural seafloor and technological remnant will blur, not through violence but through patience. The ocean absorbs without hurry. What defines this place, then, is restraint. It is marked only by impact, and even that mark is subdued. No claim is made, no presence asserted. Humanity touches this point lightly, leaving behind endings rather than beginnings, allowing the surface to remain as it has always been, open, quiet, and unoccupied. After descent ends, the process slows. What survives reentry is determined long before impact, shaped by material choice and structural design. Lightweight components disappear high above the ocean, transformed into heat and particulate that never reach the surface. Dense elements endure longer, shedding layers as friction strips away everything that cannot tolerate extreme temperature and force. By the time fragments emerge from the final passage through air, only the most resilient pieces remain. These remnants meet the ocean without spectacle. Impact energy disperses quickly, absorbed by moving water rather than solid ground. No crater forms, no shockwave carries outward. The sea closes almost immediately, leaving little disturbance beyond momentary surface motion that blends back into surrounding waves. From above, nothing marks the moment. Gravity takes over beneath the surface. Surviving fragments sink steadily, guided by mass rather than shape. Some fall almost vertically, others drift slightly as currents influence their descent. Time stretches during this passage. Minutes turn into hours before objects finally reach the seafloor, arriving scattered rather than clustered, each piece settling into a different position within a wide field. Once on the bottom, change becomes gradual. Pressure stabilizes, temperatures remain cold and constant, corrosion begins, driven by chemistry rather than motion. Metals oxidize slowly, coatings break down, edges soften. These processes operate on timescales far longer than observation usually allows. The biological response is limited and diffuse. Deep ocean ecosystems encounter these materials infrequently. Some organisms may attach briefly, treating surfaces as temporary structure, but food remains scarce and growth remains slow. There is no sudden influx of activity, no visible alteration of the surrounding environment that announces impact. Studying these outcomes is difficult by nature. Distance, depth, and cost restrict direct access. Sending instruments to observe long-term changes requires sustained commitment to a place rarely visited for any other reason. Sampling introduces disturbance, complicating interpretation. Models must fill gaps left by the absence of repeated measurement. As a result, understanding remains partial. Scientists infer long-term effects from laboratory tests, from similar materials found elsewhere, and from sparse observations gathered during unrelated expeditions. Confidence rests in consistency across these sources rather than direct evidence gathered here. The uncertainty does not imply neglect. It reflects limits inherent to extreme isolation. What happens after impact unfolds quietly, shielded by kilometers of water and years of gradual change. The ocean absorbs the event, then continues its slow rhythms without interruption. In this environment, endings fade into process. What survives becomes part of a deep system governed by patience and scale. Effects exist, but they spread thin, difficult to isolate, and slower to reveal themselves than human timelines prefer. The sea keeps its answers quietly, not concealed, but distant enough to resist easy understanding. Caution enters the story quietly here, not as alarm but as reflection. Any place that receives material from beyond Earth invites consideration of consequence. Metals, fuels, composites, and coatings arrive after intense transformation, altered by heat and force, yet still foreign to the deep ocean. Their presence introduces questions that cannot be dismissed, even when effects are expected to be minimal. Concerns center on what survives and how it behaves over time. Some components contain trace substances never produced naturally at the seafloor. Others introduce concentrated forms of common elements, gathered and delivered in ways the environment did not design for. In isolation, each fragment appears insignificant. Together, they create a pattern that science must acknowledge. Researchers approach these concerns with context rather than speculation. Most material that reaches the ocean has already been stripped of volatile compounds during reentry. What remains is largely inert, composed of metals and ceramics that react slowly in cold, high-pressure conditions. Corrosion occurs, but at rates measured in decades rather than seasons. Dilution acts constantly, dispersing byproducts into vast volumes of water. Biological exposure is another consideration. The deep ocean hosts life adapted to scarcity and stability. Contact with new surfaces is infrequent. Uptake of materials into food webs appears limited by low organism density and slow metabolism. Observations from comparable environments suggest minimal interaction rather than disruption. These factors shape scientific confidence. Models combining material science, ocean chemistry, and biology consistently indicate low risk. No abrupt change has been detected in surrounding waters. No accumulation of harmful substances has been observed at scales that suggest spreading impact. Absence of evidence is not proof, but it informs perspective. Still, certainty remains out of reach. The remoteness that protects the surface world also restricts observation. Long-term monitoring is rare. Direct sampling returns only snapshots, separated by years and distance. Natural variability complicates attribution, making subtle effects difficult to isolate even when data exists. The ocean itself adds layers of complexity. Currents shift slowly, sediments move unpredictably. Chemical interactions depend on microconditions that change across meters and centuries. No single measurement can capture processes unfolding at such scales. As a result, understanding settles into probability rather than conclusion. Scientists speak in ranges and margins, in confidence levels shaped by comparison rather than direct proof. This is not a failure of knowledge, but a reflection of the environment being studied. Some systems resist full clarity simply because they operate beyond convenient reach. Here, environmental questions remain open not because they are ignored, but because they unfold too slowly and too quietly for easy resolution. The ocean absorbs, transforms, and disperses with patience that exceeds human timelines. Risk appears low, not eliminated, and certainty remains distant, not denied. In this balance between caution and context, the story continues without final answers. The place remains calm, holding both fragments of technology and unanswered questions in equal measure, reminding us that some outcomes can only be approached, never fully contained. Knowledge of this place arrives without footsteps. It comes quietly, assembled from signals gathered far above and far away. Satellites pass overhead, tracing the ocean's surface with instruments that translate reflection, temperature, and motion into data. From orbit, the region appears calm and uniform, yet subtle variations reveal currents, eddies, and long seasonal shifts invisible to the eye. Drifting instruments add another layer. Buoys released thousands of kilometers away eventually cross this water, carried by broad circulations that do not announce themselves. As they move, they sample temperature, salinity, and pressure, sending brief updates before continuing on. None remain. Each visit is transient, a line of measurements left behind as the device moves on. Below the surface, autonomous sensors listen and record without supervision. Some are anchored to the seafloor, others drift at depth for years before surfacing far from where they began. They collect fragments of a picture, never complete, but consistent enough to suggest patterns. The ocean is not observed directly, but inferred through repetition. This way of learning demands patience. Without ships nearby, instruments must function alone, relying on durable design and sparse communication. Failure often goes unnoticed. Success appears months or years later as a recovered dataset shaped as much by chance as by plan. Research advances not through immediacy, but through accumulation. Remote sensing favors scale over detail. Large movements are clear, fine interactions blur. Satellites can detect changes in sea level measured in centimeters, yet they cannot see what rests on the seafloor. Drifters trace currents over vast distances, but miss local turbulence. Each method offers reach, but sacrifices intimacy. Understanding grows through overlap. When independent measurements align, confidence increases. When they diverge, uncertainty persists. The picture that forms is broad and restrained, more contour than texture. Scientists learn what the place is like in general, not how it feels in any given moment. This distance shapes interpretation. Models fill the gaps, grounded in physics and tested elsewhere, then extended to this quiet patch of ocean. Predictions replace observation. Probability stands in for witness. The absence of direct presence becomes part of the result, influencing what can be known at all. Limits are accepted rather than solved. No technology currently allows continuous, close-range study here without extraordinary cost. The depth discourages it. The remoteness delays it. Knowledge remains partial by necessity, not neglect. Yet even this restrained understanding carries value. It confirms stability. It reveals consistency. It shows that some places change slowly, governed by processes that unfold at scales larger than attention. Learning without visiting requires humility, an acceptance that understanding does not always deepen through proximity. In this way, the loneliest place on earth is known not through encounter, but through inference. It exists clearly enough to be mapped and measured, yet distantly enough to resist familiarity. Science reaches it by extension, never quite arriving, building knowledge that remains careful, quiet, and incomplete. Nothing here invites permanence. The ocean at this point offers no materials to gather, no energy to tap, no shelter to improve. Beneath the surface, the seafloor holds sediment laid down slowly over immense time, thinly spread and difficult to reach. There are no mineral seams close enough to matter, no biological abundance to sustain extraction, no gradients that reward effort. Resources exist only in theory, outweighed by the cost of accessing them. Reaching the place is itself an obstacle that never diminishes. Distance does not shrink with technology alone. Fuel, time, and coordination remain constant demands. There are no nearby ports to support movement, no intermediate stops to ease travel, no network to grow gradually outward. Every arrival would begin and end in isolation, dependent entirely on what could be carried in and what could be taken back out immediately. Access by air offers no better solution. The absence of runways, platforms, or stable anchors makes sustained presence impractical. Weather windows open and close without regard for schedules. Emergency response remains distant by design. Any structure placed here would exist beyond support, reliant on continuous resupply across vast ocean, a commitment without return. Purpose fails even more completely. There is nothing here that demands occupation. No trade route benefits from a waypoint this remote. No research requires constant human presence when instruments suffice. No settlement could claim advantage from location alone. The place does not connect to anything else in a way that rewards staying. Human construction follows need. Cities rise where movement converges. Stations persist where activity overlaps. Infrastructure grows where return justifies maintenance. This ocean point sits outside all such logic. It is not between destinations. It is not near thresholds. It offers no leverage over space, sea, or sky. Even symbolic construction holds little meaning here. There is no audience, no continuity of visitation, no story that builds through repeated presence. Any structure would stand alone, weathered by salt and motion, unseen by those it was built for. Without interaction, meaning dissipates. The environment itself resists alteration. Waves do not pause. Corrosion begins immediately. Anchoring systems strain under constant motion. Depth complicates connection. Scale overwhelms containment. Maintenance would become the sole activity, endless and unrewarding, performed only to prevent disappearance. This resistance is not hostile. It is passive and complete. The ocean does not forbid arrival, but it declines to support continuation. It allows passage, not residence. Over time, this distinction shapes decision-making more effectively than any barrier. As a result, no long-term human footprint takes hold. There are no plans deferred, no proposals awaiting funding, no futures imagined here. Absence persists, not because it is protected, but because it remains unnecessary to change. Some places are left unbuilt, not through choice alone, but through alignment of reality. Here, lack of resources, lack of access, and lack of purpose converge into a quiet certainty. The ocean keeps this point as it is, not empty, but uninterested in being filled. Danger is often imagined as presence. Storms, predators, collisions, pressure, all the forces that act upon a place and demand attention. This ocean does not gather those forces. It sits apart from them, not shielded, but simply removed. Its isolation does not amplify threat, it narrows it. The most dangerous seas are usually busy ones. Shipping lanes intersect. Weather systems collide. Human movement compresses risk into tight corridors where failure cascades quickly. Here, those pressures disperse. The absence of traffic means fewer opportunities for accidents to compound. When something goes wrong elsewhere, it tends to do so in company. Here, there is rarely company at all. This region is not free of ocean hazards. Winds still rise, waves still build, currents still move with patient force. Yet these elements behave within familiar ranges. There are no persistent ice fields, no narrow straits, no underwater obstacles shaping sudden turbulence. The sea remains broad and open, allowing energy to spread rather than concentrate. Emptiness changes how danger functions. Hostility implies intent, an environment actively working against survival. This ocean does nothing of the sort. It does not lure, trap, or escalate. It simply exists, vast and indifferent. Its calm does not promise safety, but it does not provoke harm. What makes this distinction subtle is that isolation feels threatening to human systems. Rescue is distant, communication thins, error feels heavier. These sensations arise from limitation, not aggression. The danger comes from separation, not from the sea itself. In this quiet expanse, conditions remain stable over long periods. Weather patterns pass without obstruction. Swells travel cleanly across the surface, their energy unbroken by coastlines or congestion. The ocean expresses itself fully here, without interference, and that expression tends toward equilibrium. Calm seas do not announce themselves. They persist unnoticed, mistaken for emptiness rather than balance. The absence of disturbance allows processes to unfold slowly and predictably. From a physical perspective, this stability reduces sudden extremes rather than inviting them. Human absence reinforces this calm. No noise layers over natural sound, no structures disrupt currents, no traffic reshapes surface patterns. The sea remains close to its baseline state, guided by planetary forces rather than local interference. This does not make the place forgiving. Distance ensures that mistakes carry weight. Self-reliance becomes necessary by default. Yet this severity stems from remoteness, not from an inherently dangerous environment. The ocean does not test those who approach it. It simply offers no assistance. Understanding this difference reframes the landscape. The loneliest place on Earth is not a gauntlet, nor a battlefield. It is a wide interval where activity thins to nothing and the sea reverts to its long settled rhythms. Here, isolation removes layers of complexity rather than adding them. The calm that remains is not fragile, and it is not welcoming. It is simply untouched, holding steady in a world where danger often gathers where presence does. Weather arrives here without announcement. It forms far beyond the horizon and passes through without meeting resistance, guided by pressure systems that span oceans rather than coastlines. The surface typically holds steady, shaped by moderate winds and long-period swells that travel thousands of kilometers before reaching this point. Conditions tend toward balance, not because extremes never occur, but because the open sea allows energy to spread wide instead of gathering sharply. Air temperatures fluctuate gently, moderated by water that absorbs and releases heat slowly. There are no land masses nearby to interrupt circulation or create abrupt shifts. The atmosphere moves cleanly over the surface, smoothing transitions between systems. Cloud cover comes and goes without edge or boundary, dissolving gradually rather than breaking apart. Storms do pass through. They rise elsewhere, mature as they cross, and continue on with little to mark their presence behind them. Without ships beneath them or instruments close enough to watch directly, their passage remains largely unobserved. Wind speeds increase, waves build, rain falls into water already moving. When the system leaves, the surface relaxes back toward its earlier state. This absence of witness changes how weather is perceived. In busy oceans, storms are events measured against schedules and warnings. Here, They are processes without audience. A gale can peak and fade without a single report filed, its strongest moments known only through distant data points gathered after the fact. The ocean absorbs these events efficiently. Swells generated by storms stretch into long, even lines that continue far beyond the weather that formed them. Rainfall blends immediately into the surface, leaving no trace. Foam dissipates. The sea does not record memory in the way land does. There are no fallen trees, no eroded paths, no debris fields to suggest what passed overhead. Observation relies on separation. Satellites note cloud tops and wind vectors from above. Buoys drifting at the edge of coverage register pressure changes and wave height. These fragments are assembled later, reconstructing moments that no human experienced directly. Weather becomes something inferred rather than remembered. The lack of observers also means no intervention. Nothing changes course to avoid rough seas. No warnings alter behavior because no behavior is present to alter. The atmosphere and ocean interact without negotiation, following physical rules without interruption. This creates a rare continuity. Events unfold fully, unmodified by response. Storms do not shorten or intensify because of traffic. Calm does not attract use. The rhythm remains self-contained, governed by forces larger than human timing. Over long periods, this neutrality becomes characteristic. The region's weather is neither especially mild nor particularly violent. It is simply uninterrupted. Systems pass through as they were formed to do, and the sea beneath them adjusts without complaint. In this way, weather here exists as pure motion. It happens whether noticed or not, unfolding in a place where presence does not shape outcome. Events leave no stories behind, only patterns that fade back into the vast movement of air and water, continuing as if no one was ever meant to watch. Failure here unfolds slowly rather than suddenly. It begins not with catastrophe, but with small deviations that widen over time. A navigation error shifts position by degrees rather than meters. A system meant to correct course responds too late or not at all. In crowded regions, such drift would be noticed and adjusted quickly. In this emptiness, it continues quietly. Without nearby reference points, orientation depends entirely on instruments. When those instruments disagree or fall silent, the margin for correction narrows. There are no visual cues on the horizon, no traffic to triangulate from, no landmarks to re-establish certainty. Course becomes an estimate carried forward on trust and calculations already compromised. Distance turns minutes into days. Any request for assistance must travel outward first, relayed through satellites and networks far removed from the scene. Response, then, moves inward, crossing thousands of kilometers of open water. Even the fastest rescue assets cannot compress that scale. Time stretches, not dramatically, but inexorably. During that interval, conditions continue independently. Weather does not pause. Systems degrade further. Supplies diminish according to schedule, not urgency. Each passing hour reduces options without adding new ones. What might have remained manageable closer to shore becomes a layered problem here, compounded by waiting. Isolation multiplies risk by separating cause from remedy. A mechanical issue that would normally prompt immediate support becomes a solitary challenge. Redundancies exist, but they are finite. Once exhausted, improvisation replaces procedure. Decisions carry greater weight because reversal is unlikely. Communication itself can thin. Signals weaken with distance and angle. Equipment must operate without interruption in environments that allow little tolerance for error. When connection falters, uncertainty expands. Knowledge of what is happening lags behind reality, sometimes by hours, sometimes longer. The ocean does not escalate danger, but it does not mitigate it either. There is no surrounding infrastructure to absorb failure, no passing vessel to lend capacity, no nearby port to shorten consequence. Everything relies on endurance until assistance arrives, or until the situation resolves on its own terms. This is why planning for isolation emphasizes prevention above response. The goal is not heroic rescue, but avoidance of scenarios that require it. Systems are designed to fail gradually, to provide warning long before collapse. Yet even the best preparation acknowledges that uncertainty cannot be eliminated entirely. When something goes wrong here, the outcome is shaped less by the severity of the problem than by the distance around it. Risk does not spike abruptly. It accumulates, steadily and quietly, as time and space widen between trouble and relief. In this environment, error carries no drama, only persistence. The emptiness that defines the place offers no interference, but also no assistance. What happens next unfolds at the pace dictated by physics and logistics, reminding us that in extreme isolation, even small failures are asked to endure a very long way from help. Separation does not always require walls. Sometimes it unfolds across surfaces that appear open and continuous, offering passage rather than resistance. The ocean presents itself this way, wide and fluid, inviting movement while quietly imposing distance. From afar it looks traversable, even gentle, yet it reshapes human connection more thoroughly than most barriers on land. Water alters perception first. It removes familiar reference points, flattening the world into horizon and motion. Direction loses texture. Progress becomes abstract, measured by instruments rather than landmarks. This change affects more than navigation. It shifts how distance is felt, turning separation into something diffuse and persistent rather than immediate and visible. On land, isolation tends to be gradual. Roads branch, trails narrow, settlements thin but rarely vanish completely. Even deserts and mountains carry traces of passage, signs that others have crossed before. The ocean offers no such reassurance. Once underway, there is no evidence of proximity or escape. The absence of fixed markers turns distance into an internal experience rather than an external one. This is why oceans isolate so effectively. They do not compress separation into a single obstacle. They extend it across time. Travel becomes endurance. Each kilometer carries the same weight as the last, with no change in scenery to signal progress. The mind must carry distance without relief. The illusion of openness deepens this effect. Unlike walls or cliffs, the sea does not visibly refuse entry. It allows movement in every direction, creating a sense of possibility that fades only after commitment. Choice exists, but consequence unfolds slowly. Turning back does not feel simpler than continuing forward. The boundary holds by persistence rather than force. Psychologically, this matters. Humans orient themselves through contrast. Land provides texture, variation, and feedback. The ocean offers repetition. Waves repeat. Horizons repeat. Days at sea blur together, stretching perception of time and space simultaneously. Separation grows not through sudden loss of connection, but through steady absence of reinforcement. This isolation persists even in an age of communication. Signals cross water easily, but presence does not follow. A voice transmitted across thousands of kilometers does not alter the physical reality beneath it. Rescue, support, and community remain distant regardless of contact. The ocean allows awareness without closeness. Historically, This has shaped settlement and culture. Coasts concentrate population not because water attracts, but because it ends connection beyond a certain threshold. Oceans divide continents more decisively than mountain ranges ever have. They fragment humanity into hemispheres, histories, and rhythms shaped by which side of the water they inhabit. Even now, with travel faster than ever, oceans retain this separating power. They demand planning, resources, and intention. Crossing them remains an event rather than a convenience. The illusion of openness continues to conceal how thoroughly they reorganize space. In this sense, the loneliest places on Earth reveal something broader. Water does not need to exclude. It isolates by remaining vast and consistent, offering no edges to lean against. Humanity spreads across land with ease, but across oceans only by effort, leaving wide intervals where separation becomes complete, sustained not by hostility, but by scale. Stories usually gather where people pause. They accumulate around crossings, shelters, dangers, and promises. This place offers none of those anchors. It has never held attention long enough for memory to settle. As a result, it remains largely untouched by narrative, existing without the layers of meaning that humans tend to place upon the world. There are no myths attached to this point. No sea monsters were imagined to dwell here. No warnings were passed along about its waters. Sailors did not name it, not out of fear, but because they had no reason to linger and no reason to speak of it later. It lay beyond routes that carried tales from port to port. Indigenous histories, rich with navigation and understanding of the ocean, do not center on this exact location. Traditional knowledge followed currents, stars, islands, and seasonal patterns, building deep familiarity with regions that offered sustenance or passage. This stretch of water did not fit into those systems. It was neither destination nor corridor. It provided no landmark to return to, no signal worth encoding in story. This absence is not erasure, it is simply non-formation. Cultures do not forget what they never needed to remember. The ocean holds countless points like this, but few lie so far from everything else, so unconnected to routes of movement and survival. Here, human attention passed around rather than through, leaving nothing to pass down. Across recorded history, the pattern continues. Maps remained blank or generalized. Logs skipped from one coordinate to another without comment. Even as navigation improved and oceans filled with traffic elsewhere, this point remained a space between annotations. It was known only as part of the water between places with names. Without narrative, time behaves differently. Events leave no echo. Storms, migrations, and impacts occur without becoming part of collective memory. The ocean does not tell these stories itself. It allows them to happen, then smooths them away. In other places, absence becomes story. Deserts are framed as trials. Poles become frontiers. Depths turn into mysteries. Here, even absence resists narrative. There is nothing to frame it against. No contrast sharpens it into meaning. It simply remains. This lack of story does not diminish the place. It defines it. The loneliest point on earth is not weighed down by symbolism or fear. It does not represent loss or conquest. It has not been folded into metaphor. It exists without being interpreted. That quality is increasingly rare. Most of the planet has been named, charted, described, and retold. Layers of explanation and imagination sit atop geography until it becomes difficult to separate the place from what has been said about it. Here, geography stands almost alone, In the quiet absence of story, the point remains exactly what it is: water, distance, and time. No memory clings to it. No narrative frames it. It persists without witness across centuries, a place defined not by what happened there, but by how little ever needed to be said. Before anyone knew this place by implication, it existed as math, not as water or distance or silence, but as values arranged across a sphere. Latitude and longitude intersected in theory first, forming a solution long before it became a destination of thought. The ocean did not announce it, numbers did. Geography often feels physical, shaped by mountains and coasts that impose themselves on the senses. Yet some locations are defined only when equations are applied. Distances measured from shorelines, curves calculated across a rotating planet, data sets refined until uncertainty thins. In this case, the loneliest place emerged from subtraction rather than addition, found by removing all land until only one point remained farthest from everything else. This process was quiet and exact. Coastlines were converted into coordinates, islands became vectors, the planet itself became a model, approximated carefully enough to allow comparison at global scale. From this abstraction, a single point resolved, not chosen, not imagined, but revealed by consistency across calculations. What makes this unusual is not the math, but what followed. Once defined, the point could not be dismissed as theoretical. It occupied real water, subject to currents, weather, and depth. A solution on paper mapped directly onto the surface of the Earth. The abstract became unavoidable. Meaning entered only after precision. Before the coordinates existed, there was no reason to think of this patch of ocean as distinct. Afterward, it could be pointed to, described, and used. Numbers transformed anonymity into location. They created relevance where none had existed. This is how mathematics reshapes geography without altering matter. The sea did not change when the equations were solved. The waves did not behave differently, yet the place acquired identity. It became measurable, comparable, and ultimately useful. Its significance did not arise from experience, but from definition. Numbers shape meaning by providing edges to the boundless. They allow one stretch of water to be distinguished from another, not by appearance, but by relation, farther than all others from land, closer to orbiting humans than to any shore. These are statements of position, not sensation, yet they carry weight. Once defined, the point entered systems of planning and thought. It could be modeled for safety, chosen for descent, referenced in research. A coordinate gained consequence. This transition did not require narrative or presence. It required agreement that the calculation was sound. In this way, mathematics does not merely describe the world. It reveals structures that exist regardless of attention. Some places wait not for discovery by foot or vessel, but for recognition through pattern and proof. They are real long before they are noticed. Here, numbers did not simplify meaning, they created it. They transformed absence into distinction and distance into identity. The loneliest place on earth was not found by traveling farther than anyone else, but by measuring more carefully than ever before. In that act, an abstract solution became a physical location, quietly proving that even the most empty places can be brought into focus by precision alone. Even now, the planet holds spaces that remain fundamentally untouched. This persists not through neglect, but through scale. Satellites pass overhead constantly, tracing every curve of ocean with sensors and signals, yet their presence does not translate into occupation. Observation does not fill space, it only describes it. From above, The ocean appears connected to everything else, woven into networks of data and coverage. Signals cross it easily. Coordinates are fixed precisely. Images update daily. Still, none of this alters the physical reality below. The water remains as wide and uninhabited as it was before it was ever seen clearly. Knowledge reaches it, but presence does not follow. Global travel reinforces this contrast. Aircraft span continents in hours. Ships move cargo along routes that tighten with efficiency each year. Movement feels effortless when viewed from schedules and maps. Yet those paths avoid wide intervals, curving away from places that offer no advantage. Connectivity concentrates rather than spreads. Travel defines corridors, leaving vast spaces between them unchanged. Constant connection creates the strongest illusion. Messages travel instantly. Images stream continuously. Awareness feels complete. It becomes easy to assume that nothing remains beyond reach. Yet connection moves independently of physical density. A voice heard across the ocean does not place anyone there. Presence remains bound to bodies, infrastructure, and purpose. This is where true emptiness persists, not as a failure of access, but as an absence of reason to arrive. The planet still contains regions that resist incorporation into daily human systems. They are too distant to matter economically, too empty to attract settlement, too stable to demand intervention. Such places do not announce themselves. They do not appear dramatic or forbidden. They simply remain outside patterns of use. Their emptiness is quiet and consistent, maintained by the same forces that drive activity elsewhere. Efficiency avoids them. Safety bypasses them. Culture never settles long enough to leave imprint. In a world increasingly shaped by presence, these regions serve as contrast rather than exception. They reveal that expansion has limits not imposed by technology, but by choice and necessity. Humanity fills where benefit accumulates and leaves where benefit dissipates. This remaining emptiness is not fragile. It does not rely on protection or policy. It persists because it asks nothing and offers nothing in return. The ocean here does not compete for attention. It does not resist. It simply remains vast enough to be ignored. There is significance in that endurance. It suggests that even under constant observation, not everything becomes part of the human domain. Some spaces remain defined by distance rather than connection, by absence rather than activity. The loneliest place on Earth exists as proof of this balance. Despite satellites, despite global travel, despite uninterrupted communication, it remains physically untouched. The world continues to hold intervals where presence thins to nothing, where geography outpaces attention, and where emptiness endures not as mystery, but as fact. Change does not announce itself here. It unfolds beneath the scale of days and years, moving instead on timelines that stretch beyond memory. The surface appears fixed, defined by coordinates and distance, yet the earth beneath it is never fully still. Isolation, like everything else, drifts. The ocean floor below this point rests on moving plates, fragments of the planet's outer shell sliding slowly across a softer mantle. Their motion is measured in centimeters per year, imperceptible without instruments and patience. Over centuries, these increments accumulate, carrying the seafloor and everything above it along quiet trajectories. The loneliest place does not remain anchored. It travels, just slowly enough to feel stationary. This movement is subtle but relentless. The South Pacific spreads and rearranges through tectonic processes that began long before any map existed. Ridges create new crust. Older sections sink and cool. The geometry of distance changes as plates shift relative to continents and islands. Isolation is recalculated continuously by forces that do not pause. Sea level adds another layer of motion. As climate cycles unfold, ice advances and retreats, locking and releasing water across the globe. When ice melts, sea level rises, altering coastlines by meters over time. When ice accumulates, water withdraws. These shifts redraw the boundary between land and ocean, reshaping the measurements that once defined remoteness. Even small changes matter. A coastline moving outward or inward alters distances subtly, changing which point lies farthest from land. What is loneliest today may yield that distinction in the future, replaced not by movement across the surface, but by the surface changing around it. The ocean itself participates in this slow rearrangement. Currents redistribute heat and mass, sediments drift and settle, thickening some regions and thinning others. The seafloor flexes under weight and release. None of this is abrupt. None of it seeks outcome. It simply continues. From a human perspective, this pace feels like permanence. Generations pass without noticing difference. Coordinates remain reliable within lifetimes. Yet across deep time, nothing holds still long enough to claim eternity. Isolation migrates, not dramatically, but persistently. This gradual motion reveals something essential. Remoteness is not a fixed property. It is a momentary balance within a dynamic system. The loneliest place exists only because conditions align for now. As Earth shifts, that alignment will dissolve and reform elsewhere. What changes, then, is not the emptiness itself, but its location. The quality of isolation endures even as its coordinates wander. The planet continues to generate distance through motion, ensuring that some places always remain far from others. Here, change feels almost philosophical. The place resists presence not because it is static, but because it participates fully in Earth's long rhythms. Isolation moves with the planet, carried quietly by stone and water together. In time, this point will no longer hold its distinction. Another will take its place. The ocean will not notice the exchange. It will continue moving, slowly and without pause, proving that even the most distant places are part of a world that never truly stops. At the edge of comprehension, emptiness begins to exert a pull, not the kind that rushes forward, but one that settles slowly, drawing attention through absence rather than stimulus. Humans have long been responsive to spaces that offer little to engage with, where the mind finds fewer signals to chase and more room to wander. Vast emptiness alters mental pace. Without constant variation, perception stretches. Time feels wider. Thoughts lose urgency and drift into longer arcs. This does not always produce comfort, nor does it immediately provoke discomfort. It creates a pause, a suspension between reactions, where awareness becomes less crowded. Psychologically, such spaces remove reference. There is no scale to measure oneself against, no nearby object to define distance or safety. In these conditions, the mind begins to supply its own structure. Memory, imagination, and reflection quietly surface, not invited, but unopposed. Emptiness acts as an amplifier, not of fear, but of whatever remains when distraction fades. This explains why calm and unease can coexist without conflict. Calm emerges from reduced stimulation, from the absence of immediate demands. Unease arises from uncertainty, from the lack of cues that normally anchor understanding. Neither dominates. They overlap gently, creating a weight that is felt rather than interpreted. The weight of this place does not come from threat. There is no obvious danger pressing inward. Instead, the sensation comes from scale. The recognition of distance beyond practical reach settles into awareness. It is the presence of too much room, not too little. Humans are accustomed to environments shaped by intention. Paths suggest movement, boundaries suggest limits. Purpose is embedded everywhere. When those signals vanish, the mind confronts a space that has not been adjusted to human scale. This confrontation is subtle, but persistent. In such places, meaning does not arrive quickly. There is nothing to decode, nothing arranged for interpretation. The mind searches, finds no pattern, then slowly accepts the absence of one. That acceptance carries a gravity of its own. This gravity explains the draw. Emptiness offers a rare psychological condition, a setting where the mind encounters itself without interruption, not in isolation from the world, but in contact with something that does not respond. The ocean here does not reflect intention. It remains neutral, vast, and uninterested. That neutrality is compelling. It suggests a world not oriented around observation or use. For a species accustomed to shaping surroundings, encountering a place that resists involvement can feel quietly profound. The loneliest place on Earth embodies this dynamic. It feels heavy because it does not participate, it does not react, offer, or require. In that stillness, human awareness expands to fill the space, discovering that even nothing can hold attention, simply by remaining vast enough to stay beyond reach. The connection appears not through similarity of appearance, but through absence. Space and ocean meet in the way they withdraw from human presence, leaving behind environments that operate almost entirely without regard for observation. Their surfaces differ, yet the experience of reaching them shares a quiet resemblance shaped by isolation. Both begin where familiar reference ends. Above the atmosphere, gravity loosens its hold. Below the waves, pressure tightens it. In each case, the human body ceases to belong without support. Survival depends on layers of technology designed to hold a small pocket of normalcy against surroundings that do not allow compromise. These pockets are temporary by design. Isolation defines the relationship. Astronauts circle the planet, separated by vacuum. Beneath the loneliest ocean, distance performs the same role. Rescue is distant, communication thins, mistakes amplify. In both realms, presence becomes rare and measured, sustained only by preparation and restraint. Limits reveal themselves gradually. Space resists through radiation, temperature extremes, and the absence of air. The deep ocean responds with darkness, crushing pressure, and chemical scarcity. Neither offers immediate hostility. Instead, they enforce boundaries quietly, through physics rather than force. Exploration in both settings advances cautiously. Each step is planned long before arrival. Redundancy becomes essential. Simplicity gains value. Complex systems must function flawlessly because failure cannot be absorbed by environment. There is no margin beyond design. These shared limits produce humility. Progress does not feel triumphant, it feels provisional. Each visit becomes an agreement with conditions that remain unchanged by presence. Tools extend reach, but not control. This humility reshapes how exploration is understood. Neither space nor the deep ocean can be fully conquered or settled. They allow only brief occupation. They do not accumulate infrastructure easily. They do not reward permanence. The quiet link lies here. Both environments remind humanity that scale still matters. Distance retains authority. Nature does not yield simply because it has been measured or seen. Above and below, observation replaces habitation. Instruments listen where people cannot stay. Data flows back from places that refuse ongoing presence. Knowledge accumulates without physical imprint. The loneliest point in the ocean sits directly beneath paths traced by orbiting spacecraft. This alignment is not symbolic, it is structural. Both exist at edges where human systems reach their practical end. Above one, gravity releases. Beneath the other, pressure overwhelms. In between lies a narrow band where daily life persists. Together, space and ocean frame human experience. They mark boundaries of reach, reminding civilization of proportion. For all expansion and invention, some environments remain defined by their distance, not their accessibility. This shared isolation does not threaten, it steadies, it offers perspective. When exploration reaches places that resist permanence, ambition adjusts. The focus shifts from presence to understanding. In this way, the quiet link becomes clear. Space and ocean remain vast enough to humble, not through danger, but through indifference. They do not reject exploration, they simply remind it of its limits, and in doing so, they preserve intervals of the world where absence continues uninterrupted. Discarding is an intentional act. It begins long before release, in planning rooms and simulations where outcomes are traced until only one path remains acceptable. Some objects are not meant to return intact. Their final journey is designed around where they will end, not how they will be remembered. This place is chosen because it absorbs consequence without passing it on. When something reaches the end of its usefulness in orbit, it still carries mass, speed, and potential harm. Bringing it down anywhere near daily life concentrates risk. Distance spreads it thin. The ocean here offers separation at scale, converting danger into dispersion. Abandonment in this context is not negligence, it is restraint. Engineers calculate trajectories that guide spent hardware toward emptiness rather than toward population or infrastructure. Responsibility takes the form of removal, not recovery. The object is sent away so it can no longer threaten what remains close. What arrives here is the residue of ambition, spacecraft that once carried supplies, structures that supported life above the planet, components that served precise functions now stripped of purpose. Their descent marks a quiet conclusion rather than a celebration. No ceremony follows. There is only completion. This choice reveals how modern systems manage risk. Instead of storing danger or attempting perfect control, they locate places where failure carries minimal consequence. Distance becomes a buffer. Isolation becomes protection. The ocean accepts what cannot be safely handled elsewhere. Responsibility here is measured spatially. Harm is reduced not through elimination, but through placement. The farther an outcome lies from people and ecosystems of use, the more acceptable it becomes. This logic governs everything from waste disposal to flight paths. In extreme cases, it governs reentry from orbit. Sending objects here acknowledges limits. It recognizes that recovery is sometimes more dangerous than release. Precision replaces permanence. The goal is not to preserve every artifact, but to ensure that their end does not ripple outward. Distance functions as a solution because it remains stable. It does not change behavior. It does not require maintenance. Once chosen, it continues to separate cause from effect without further intervention. The ocean at this point does not accumulate traffic or attention. It remains suitable precisely because it remains empty. There is humility embedded in this process. The choice to abandon reflects acceptance that some creations cannot be reclaimed without unacceptable cost. Letting go becomes part of responsible design. Over time, this has turned the loneliest place into a repository of endings, not a dump, but a destination chosen for restraint. What is sent here is what society decides not to bring closer. In that decision, a pattern emerges. Risk is not always eliminated, it is relocated. Responsibility becomes geographic. Distance absorbs what planning cannot fully neutralize. The ocean does not record these decisions. It does not respond. It simply remains wide enough to hold them without amplification. In choosing where to send objects away, humanity reveals how it balances ambition with caution, relying on emptiness itself to complete the task. Scale reveals itself quietly at the end of this journey, not through spectacle or threat, but through endurance. Despite movement and measurement, some places remain beyond daily reach. They do not vanish as technology advances. They persist alongside it, unchanged in their essential distance. Earth continues to hold regions that do not invite settlement or use. They are not hidden, they are simply large enough, remote enough, or empty enough to remain outside routines of occupation. Their untouched state is not accidental. It is the outcome of balance between effort and return, between presence and purpose. Resistance does not always come from hostility. In many cases, it comes from indifference. These places do not push back. They do not challenge directly. They offer nothing to hold on to, nothing to build upon, nothing that reshapes itself around human intention. Presence arrives briefly, then moves on. This resistance has shape. It appears in distances that stretch logistics beyond reason, in depths that transform pressure into certainty, in isolation that multiplies consequence without dramatic gesture. These qualities do not prohibit entry, they quietly discourage permanence. The planet has always contained such spaces. Long before satellites traced every curve and ships crossed every ocean, vast areas remained functionally absent from human life. That condition has narrowed, but not disappeared. The world still exceeds the scale of our systems. This matters because it introduces perspective. It reminds humanity that expansion does not equate to possession. Presence does not automatically follow awareness. Even under constant observation, some places remain beyond incorporation, not through protection, but through proportion. Perhaps this endurance is not a flaw to correct. Perhaps it is a feature to preserve, not through rules alone, but through respect for limits that arise naturally. Some environments maintain integrity by resisting usefulness. They retain value precisely because they remain unclaimed. In these places, Earth exists for itself. Processes unfold without interruption. Weather moves without witness. Water circulates without extraction. Time progresses without annotation. This continuity offers a counterweight to landscapes shaped entirely by intention. The loneliest place on Earth sits within this category. It has been measured, defined, and used at a distance, yet it remains physically untouched. Its emptiness has not been replaced by narrative or infrastructure. It continues to exist as space rather than setting. This does not diminish human achievement. It grounds it. It clarifies that progress unfolds within boundaries that remain vast. Earth still holds intervals where presence thins to nothing and perspective widens accordingly. As exploration advances, these untouched places offer restraint. They remind humanity that not every location must be reached, altered, or claimed. Some should remain as they are, not because they are fragile, but because they complete the balance of the world. In the end, the planet does not shrink simply because it is known. Some distances remain intact, some places resist presence. And in that resistance, Earth quietly affirms its scale, larger than any single ambition, and perhaps healthiest where absence is allowed to endure.